Mics are on.
Well,
All right, we're ready to go?
Today with Phil.
Good evening, everyone.
He does a great job.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. We're delighted to see some people here in the audience this evening. This is a new thing for the town of Yarmouth, and we're trying to get more information out about town meeting so that it'll improve our taxpayers' understanding and will help move things along at town meeting, generate some additional interest, gets more people to come to town meeting. But so this evening, first of all, this is a formal select board meeting. It has been warned, so we need to have those formalities taken care of. And so this is the Board of Selectmen meeting on April 25th, 2019 for the town of Yarmouth. I'd like to ask everyone to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have some of the town warrant copies up front. If anyone needs one that doesn't have one right now, we have extras here available. And as I said, this is a new approach for the town and the select board generally with regard. We have quite a few staff members here that are going to participate this evening. We have the ability to have, do we have the ability, Chris, to have calls in and emails in with questions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, folks can, there's a few opportunities. People can email selectmen@yarmouth.ma.us with any questions. They can also reach out to us directly through direct message or via post on our Twitter account, Town of Yarmouth, as well as our Facebook account, which is also the Town of Yarmouth.
Okay. So we're trying to make this more interactive for everyone and hopefully, as I said, generate some additional interest. We have a town warrant that includes 40-some-odd articles, a number of which have been withdrawn in advance of town meeting, which is on May 4th, as I think everyone here probably understands. And but what we're going to do this evening, it's not awfully structured. This is, again, an experiment, so to speak, in our approach to things. So we're going to allow questions, and we'll try to be interactive with that and try to answer questions as we go along. And hopefully people at home will be able to follow everything as we do that. Traditionally, the beginning of town meeting, our moderator stands and gives instructions as to how things would occur. I'm not going to be doing that. And then typically he asks the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to make an opening statement, which I have here. I'm not going to bore you with it this evening. What we'll do is go right into the articles and go down 1 through, is it 44? 47? 49, okay. But a number of those have been withdrawn, so not to worry. And if you'd like to ask questions, please use a microphone so everyone can hear you and people at home can hear your question. And we'll try to answer those as we go along. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I might?
yes.
One of the pieces of feedback we received from the meeting last year that we incorporated in the warrant this year was like a plain English explanation of each article. That was something that we received a lot of commentary. Can you explain a little bit more about what this means? So as they follow along in the warrant, you'll see underneath the information of the article, there'll be explanation as to what it is. And so every department put one together, and I think that should go a long way to help explain some of the terminology that might be used or what the appropriation request is for and whatnot.
And so for people at home, this warrant has been posted online.
That's correct.
At www.yarmouth.ma.us, and from the home screen, There's a link there that I saw today that you can go directly to the warrant so you can follow along at home.
And there's also YouTube videos that staff and committees put together detailing a number of the various articles. They're very short, maybe less than 2 minutes, and they very much help illustrate what the intent of the article is.
All right, so unless there are questions, at this stage, we'll dive in and start with Article 1, which is typically just a brief review of some of the supplemental appropriations for the previous year that are required. Typically, we run over our snow and ice budget for the year, and that's a supplemental appropriation. And we also have an appropriate, so this year, because the winter was rather light, we have a rather minor, compared to previous years, snow and ice appropriation of $44,362. And then there's a $300,000 construction and demolition appropriation that, is Jeff?
Yes, Jeff's here.
Jeff here, can you talk a little bit about that at this point? Are you prepared to do that?
Certainly. Jeff Colby, Public Works Director. And this is an item that is covered by revenues that come in. So it's not simply just an expense that goes out, but there is a portion of this that is the disposal of the construction demolition material that comes in. The volume this year well exceeded the projections from the previous year, which is a good business item, but we do have to pay for the expenses. There is, again, revenue that covers this expense, more than covers this expense. So we have revenue that comes in that will be free cash for next year, but there is an expense that has to be paid associated with the disposal of that material.
Okay, all right. So this is typically commercial.
Building materials.
Building materials, right. Okay. So that is Article 1. Article 2 is a kind of a housekeeping article, and typically the chair reads through all these details with regard to transfers of funds from one source to another. And this is really bookkeeping cleanup for the last fiscal year. And there are no actual funds being dispersed. And as you can read down the details of this, I'm not going to read through this. I will do that at town meeting. But rather than bore everyone with those details at this stage, we'll move on to Article 3, which is the golf enterprise operating budget. And typically, again, we read that article and move the article for the golf enterprise budget. And I'll read the explanation on the golf operating budget. This article is the operating budget for the golf division and is funded by golf fees and revenues, as well as $149,000 from golf reserves, a portion of which is derived from the general fund subsidy provided to the golf division last year. Now, there have been a number of different meetings in the last number of weeks with regard to the golf division. Pat, are you prepared to make any remarks on Pat Armstrong on the golf article?
I had some questions on the budget here on, starting with the various departments.
We're going to get to that in just a moment. Thank you, Vita.
Sir, we felt that with the asterisk addition of explanation for the $149,000 that it was somewhat clear, but if you're finding or there's questions from anyone that they would like more clarity, we would have a slide available at town meeting that would explain all the different areas where supplemental revenues were drawn from to support the golf budget for this year. So I'd be happy to put a slide together if you don't feel that this is sufficient in your estimation.
Well, I think, I'm not really sure at this point what would be most effective.
Well, can I just ask one question?
Sure,
on it?
go
I think
ahead.
that, maybe for a little bit of clarity, because sometimes, I think this is going to get a little bit complicated. We also have an article later on that we'll discuss that relates to fees.
Correct.
So for people who've been following at home over the past couple months, we've been working to turn around the golf operations and make it self-funded so that the coming years don't have to be supplemented. The expenses in the golf budget are predicated upon this budget here for the golf department is predicated upon the passage of the increased fees? Is that a correct assumption?
That's correct. The fees that are being asked for are applicable to the 2020 year, which is the FY20 request.
Thank you.
All right. Any other?
If you had any questions, sir, I'll just put a slide together in case there's any questions. Why don't we just say
That would
that's
be
going to
helpful.
happen?
All right,
Okay.
thank you. I'll go back, and Vita was right, I kind of skipped over the operating budget, which is pretty basic to our presentation at town meeting. What the typical approach at town meeting is to go down section by section. Our moderator takes a section of the overall budget and then moves that section and then proceeds on to the next one. So what I think we'll follow a similar approach if that makes sense at this stage. And then if there are questions as we go down through each individual section, feel free to raise your hand, come to the microphone, and ask questions on the budget.
Excuse me, can I ask a point of clarification?
Yes.
I just wanted general clarification for tonight in terms of what our role as an audience is. Are we, as you go through each article, are we allowed to put our hands up saying?
Absolutely.
Whatever, what is your expectation of us from us?
Our expectation and desire is to have this interactive,
Okay.
so that we have questions and answers and clarification and so forth. Yes,
Thank
so
you.
feel free to come to the microphone and pose questions as we go along. So I will read the explanation of the operating budget. As I said, the first part of that article is a lengthy review of some bookkeeping transactions, transfers back and forth. And then the lead-in to the operating budget itself is as follows. The longstanding direction that the Board of Selectmen has provided to the town administrators to prepare the town budget within the fiscal constraints of Proposition 2.5 and to provide the best possible services and facilities within those constraints. This balanced budget is based upon reasonable revenue estimates and does not rely on any one-time funding sources to pay for recurring services and expenses. All budgets have been reviewed in detail by the Finance Committee, which has recommended the budget as presented in the column on the far right of your warrant. In summary, this is a budget we can afford, and the Board of Selectmen asks for your approval on this article. So Article 2 in detail, running from pages 2 through 7 in the warrant, and that includes golf. In pages 2 through 7 in the warrant details the budget by major expense category. So what we'll do is as we do in town meeting, just talk about the major sections and then entertain questions as we go along. The first section of the budget is general government. It includes the town administrator's office, the finance committee, the selectman's office, and central purchasing, the assessor's offices, collector and treasurer expenses, town clerk, and election and registration expenses. The total expenses for those municipal offices are shown on page 3, and it amounts to a budget for fiscal 2020 of $1,596,000.
Norm, that's
Yes.
incorrect, because there's a subtotal for the first page on this. It would be
You're
the
right.
total.
Okay, thank you. There's a subtotal on page 2, as Mrs. Post just pointed out, of $9.7 million, $9,704,340. And so that would, someone help me out here with where the actual total is
The
shown.
total's it's 9,704,340 and 1,596,617 of the departments that you're talking about.
Okay. All right, that is a little confusing, so,
Well, we could have stopped at the end of page 2. We could just talk about that first section.
okay, let's do that. The first section, as I said, deals with the town administrator's office and the finance committee, central purchasing, and the select board office. The major expenses included in the $9.7 million, if you look up above on page 2, are pension expenses, $4.1 million, or $4,155,552, and health insurance of $2,753,950. So those are the major parts of that $9 million expense item. Are there any questions on page 2? Yes, Peter?
I guess I would have to go back to the actual FY18 for the wages, for the administrator's office, because from then until now, there's been a $130,000 increase. And my question is, I can think of the 4 employees who are within the suite of offices. Who are the 1.75 other employees that come under that?
The town administrator's office transferred an employee last year from the finance department, so there was no new position. It was just a transfer from one department to the other. That's in our licensing division here in town, as well as the newly created position of human resources director that falls under the town administrator's office as well.
So that $130,000 mainly is the salaries for those 2 people.
That's correct.
Okay. Then when we go down to energy, and we look at the budget for the current year, is that a typo? The $840,000?
So this is another line that's been split. You'll notice the other half of that is later in the Public Works Department budget, and that's related to streetlight and those other energy-related expenses. It's really just to make sure that we're budgeting these lines in the appropriate departments in which they fall under, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so as an example, motor fuels for the entire town used to be on the administrator's budget. We've now put motor fuels back into the budgets for the departments that have motor fuel. It makes more sense for them to understand how much money's being allocated at their level to run their vehicle fleet. It gets a little bit easy sometimes to understand, to place an order when somebody else is paying the bill, but it's now been part of their budget, same like with streetlights. The idea there is it gives us a better way to account for the actual expenses for those departments.
So there was a kind of an anomaly. You tried that for 1 year?
No,
Because
yeah.
well, it went from 352 in 18 and then to 840,000, and now it's back to what, so this was an experiment, sort of?
No, it's not uncommon for organizations. As you streamline and you lose people to retirements, they sometimes think potentially that it's easier to put it all under one budget to manage it through. And I can't speak to what happened in 18, as it relates to why that number particularly is so low. Perhaps Ed Centio has some information being here at that time. But in general, when we put the budget together for this year, the idea was to decentralize it and give the purchasing accounts back to those departments that are responsible.
Okay, I understand that. So then, the insurance,
Health
the
insurance?
last one, compared to,
Yeah.
even to what it was this current year, and certainly, I mean, that's more than a 25% increase.
We have had a number of losses on our insurance policy at the town level. As you know, being in this building, we had 2 very significant losses, but we've had other losses across the town from weather-related damages. So the premium change in charge for that's reflected in this new number. And also nationwide, the trend is premiums for property casualty insurance are up anyways across the country. And when we budgeted this, we get a number from the insurance carrier to carry, and that's the number that they had said was a safe number for us to carry to ensure that our insurance bills would be covered. But we have suffered a very high rate of property damage in town in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I kind of figured it probably had to do a lot with the flood and whatever in here, so that's a very major increase. Okay, thank you.
No comment on our wage?
How dare you?
I think somebody should amend it on the town floor and change that to minimum wage.
We can't afford to pay you guys minimum wage. Christine Greeley from West Yarmouth. I had a couple of questions for some clarity here. One is that energy management expense went from 0 to 5,000. So I wondered
Emergency
what that was.
management, yeah, so that's a good question. One of the things that was problematic in the budget, our budgets from an expense side are very lean to begin with, and just about everything imaginable is accounted for. So with all the storms and whatnot that we had last year, we ran into a scenario with our CERT team. We had to beg, borrow, and steal money, not steal, but find money somewhere to pay just basic protective equipment supplies. So for instance, if we needed to get a generator or something, we had zero flexibility because everything was so tight. So not knowing what emergencies we might have in the future, we've had our fair share in the last 18 months. We thought a few $1,000s put into that account would give us a little bit of flexibility, whether it's equipment for the personnel and supplies related to keeping that going, so that we had a place to identify where that is.
I was going to make a sarcastic questioning on your legal account as to whether or not there truly was enough money, but
Well-
we'll move.
Oh, no, you raise a good point. So you will notice that the legal account went up. We had a significant uptick
Number.
in legal expense
Yeah.
incurment. I believe that the number we're carrying will be enough so that I don't have to, like in this past year, we had to ask the Finance Committee a couple of times
Right.
for some transfers. We're still in a high environment for this cost item, but I think that number for sure will cover us, so.
Okay. Now I have a question is, are we eliminating all telephone service if we're going from the 95,000 to 0? What's going on with that?
IT, I believe, is carrying that number now.
It's now been moved
Yeah.
like you did in the others? Okay, thank you. And then the final thing I wanted to know about was OPEB. Are we not making any contributions to that, or what's the story on that, why that's not showing? And there's no number even listed for FinCom. You've got zeros across the columns, and then suddenly there's a left vacant. So is there something missing there, or are we not doing anything? What's happening?
No, OPEB costs are built in a few areas, one in the pension line, others in enterprise accounts, as well as you'll notice a $200,000 supplement in free cash in a later article to
Okay.
to fully fund our ARC this year. I think it was a line at some point in the budget there, but it's funded in other areas.
Okay, so that actually the figure that would appear under there, even though there's nothing there, would be 0, and then it's being held elsewhere?
Yeah, we're covering the annual required contribution.
Okay, thank you.
It should be noted, a couple of years ago, the Select Board voted to fully fund OPEB,
Yeah.
and the result of that was a significant reduction in the future service cost to the tune of $10 million.
Right.
So the policy change that the board made was productive in that regard in terms of reducing the future liability that the town was subject to.
Yeah, we've actively been working on it out at Cape Cod Tax, so that's why I had a question on
Right.
why this wasn't in the line. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on page 2? Yes, at the back. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had a question, I think it was somewhat covered by the last speaker who raised it with regard to the legal bill being $140,000. Back in FY19, it was $100,000. And is that for outside attorneys or settlements of lawsuits?
It's, so interestingly, that's a good question. So we have 2 retained counsels, one for labor and one for general town legal services. In both of those instances, those firms had not provided to us a rate increase for a number of years. For instance, in basic general town legal expense, for $6,500 a month, he's on a retainer. And that, for the first time, I think, and this is he's going into his 4th year coming up, he'd asked for an additional $500 a month to be added to his retainer. Labor legal counsel asked for a small adjustment as well. There is some other additional legal expenses we incur. One most notable is related to Vineyard Wind. We have a specialty legal firm on retainer for that. We don't pay them unless they do something for us. We have some filings that we're required to make as part of that process, so there was some expense occurred associated with that. But in general, that's not settlement money at all.
Okay.
It's just simply for incurred legal fees with the legal activity that we have going on with the regional school district. There's outside fee associated with that. Although that is right now being handled by town council, it falls outside the scope of their agreement with us.
Now, is town council funding separate out of the 140 that you're proposing?
So the town council general legal services retainage is paid for. Part of that is, all of that is paid for in that 140.
And how much is that off?
It'd be $7,000 a month, so.
So roughly half the budget?
Yeah.
Half that, and the
About
balance is
84,000, about $84,000.
$84,000. So is the balance your anticipation of expenditure?
Yeah, so the balance, you have to make.
So you
the
don't
best
have to
estimate.
come back to the finance committee and ask
Yeah.
for additional money?
So based on what we incurred this past year, by going to the finance committee, I believe we asked the finance committee for $60,000 extra. All of that went to the Vineyard Wind. That level of effort isn't that great this year, but it's still a significant amount, but we're carrying it in that cost structure there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the cost for bargaining legal, is that the?
Labor contracts.
Labor
Yeah,
contracts.
Unfortunately, we have, I believe, 7 unions, and they're not in sync right now, so they all are expiring at different times, so we're incurring constantly legal incurment because, usually if you had them all settled in 3-year increments, you'd only be incurring that typically in 3-year timeframes, but because they're all over, we're continuously having incurments on that line
It
item.
appears that that's pretty constant and fairly reasonable,
It
given
is
the
a very,
fact.
it's, what I would say with both councils, the town had received exceptional legal service for the fees incurred, no question about it.
Thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to the remainder of general government, which is shown on page 3 as municipal finance and town accountant expenses. And the total of those items are shown just above the black line on page 3. For fiscal 2020, it'd be $1,596,617. And most of that is in salaries and wages, whether it's for the finance office or assessors, collector and treasurer's office, town clerk, and so forth. Are there any questions on that page? Okay. The bottom of the page, page 3, we start with community development. And those expenses are detailed at the bottom of page 3 and on to page 4, continuing down through for a total of $3,040,588. And no.
They're two different
Departments, sir. That's right.
Oh, they're separate?
So community development ends on the bottom of page 3, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing. All right. Of the $3 million, $2.4 million is wages and $600,000 is expenses. And if you look at the major categories, libraries, $616,000 of wages, $194,000 of expenses. Natural resources, $630,000 of wages and $144,000 of expenses. And on down the line. And then we come to, of course, Pat's salary, and that's the big number on this page, right, Pat? All right. Are there any questions on community services? Yes, Peter, go ahead.
This almost $100,000 increase for recreation offset wages to full-time employees. I don't quite understand what the word offset means in that respect, so.
It means it's paid for through fees, correct?
Right, yeah. I'm sure Pat can explain that. Yeah.
So offset budgets are fees generated through programs and then are utilized to pay for the expenses of those programs. So in an offset type of financing, on July 1, you start with $0. You raise your fees, and then you pay your expenses through those, and any balance left in the budget on June 30th rolls back into the general fund, and you start with $0 on July 1 again. So the state looks at how we've raised fees over the last 3 or 4 years and what our fee anticipation is, and they certify this budget. So it goes through the state, and Mr. Centio, the finance director, presents our request, and then the state certifies that we are allowed to ask for this amount as a cap. So we often, in recreation, raise more than the revenues that show on this offset. But we are tied to only be able to spend what the certified expense line is as well. So that's capped that way. So if the town were to raise $397,000 in FY20 for revenues, we would only be able to spend $347 between the wages and then another $38 in the expense. We'd be controlled. It would be controlled by the state. Okay? And the second question of $100,000 different in the wages is the new minimum wage laws that have been put into place. In order for us to be competitive, we're actually increasing every year our fees for our programs to cover that 75 cent an hour in every minimum, to grow minimum wage up from when it was $11 2 years ago, and in 2024 it'll be $15 an hour.
I was going to say, that sounds like 75 cents.
Well, but we have thousands of participants in the program, so that incremental, when we have 140 staff, that impacts, and so that's how the wages, we raise it for that little, but it covers those expenses.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there any other questions on community services? Okay, so community services generally covers libraries, natural resources, senior services, and recreation. So we've talked about those areas at this stage. So we'll go on to public safety. That's at the bottom third of page 4. And of course, that includes the two very significant departments of police and fire. And the police budget for wages, as you can see on this page, is $7,170,932, and then $100,000 for training and the proactive crime team, and $221,000 of expenses. And if you drop down to the next section, the fire department, total wages of $6,775,263, and you can see the expenses detailed below that. So the total of the police and fire expenditures planned for 2020 are $14.9 million, as shown on the top of page 5. So are there any questions on police and fire? Yes, Chris?
I just wanted an explanation of the bracketing that occurs when you have the statement of overtime and wages line item, and then you've got brackets, and it shows in both police and fire. What does that represent? How does that factor into what's going on here?
It doesn't mean that they're subtracted. That's, thinking as an accountant, usually brackets mean a reduction, and that's just an indication of how much overtime is included within the salary and wages.
Within the wage, so that the 643,411 is actually included in the 7170932. Okay.
That's my understanding, yes.
That's
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's a little confusing. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
I see that the overtime for fire was reduced from last year to this year. Is that because of the actuals that were spent, or?
Just to fund in part to fund the 4 new firefighters through the SAFER grant.
So
The idea is
so
you
this
bring
moves
some
them into
savings and-
regular salaries,
As opposed to overtime that you would incur by having fewer firefighters.
Okay.
and that's what we were hopeful for.
That's
That
correct.
that realizes itself.
But that's only a partial offset, right? Because the
Correct as well.
number isn't that significant. For 4 firefighters, the figure is $80,000, and we don't get 4 firefighters for $80,000.
You're correct.
Well,
So it's just a partial offset.
Correct.
We
Yes,
get,
yeah.
we get reimbursement for 3 years, is that
I think
correct on
the,
those?
3 years.
Is it 3 years? And are there additional benefits in that
The chief can speak to that, yeah.
6 point, hi, I didn't want you to feel like you
Good
came for
evening.
nothing.
Oh, happy to do it. Happy to do it. Chief Simonian, the fire department. Yeah, so we were fortunate to get the SAFER grant that will cover 75% of the salaries and benefits for the first 2 years and 35% in the 3rd year. And in the 4th year, the town assumes the total liability.
Great. So the benefits, the portion of our that we're responsible for of the benefits is within the 6.7 million?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you recall, we adjusted the ambulance rates last year to help accommodate for the day in which we'll have to fully fund the entire 4.
Yeah, so the combination of the reduction in the overtime was moved to the salaries line, and Mr. Sentio can correct me if I'm wrong, and the ambulance fee increase will, as Mr. Knappich said, that will help fund it in the 4th year. They're not in that number?
They're not in that number. Where are they at?
They're in the health insurance
Yeah,
line.
in the administration?
I stand corrected. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Thank you, Ed. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's great.
Okay, we have another question, Vita? All right.
Should I get a chair? No.
So, the expenses, what's included in that? And it's interesting because from year to year, they seem to be fairly stable. So each year, almost $500,000 is, it comes under the expenses. What is that?
More like a quarter.
So it's several items. The major one is the ambulance expendables, I'll call them. So your IV fluids, your needles, all the expendables, that's a huge portion of that 486. We also maintain 3 fire stations out of the fire expense budget. Repairs, maintenance, there's vehicle maintenance, which runs usually $80,000 to $90,000 to repair our fleet, which is about 27 vehicles, boats, trailers. That's the majority of those items.
Okay.
Notice that in the case of the police, it's also very stable, more or less,
Well, they give the
At less
prisoners
than half of that.
bars now for food, so that's help. They get protein bars.
We run a tight ship at our
They
place.
need heart medication in case there's more nights like Tuesday night, Vita, and you need heart medication, so they have to have it on hand.
As soon as I get palpitations.
All right, so,
You have a question back there, no?
excuse me.
We had a hand
Oh, do
up
we have
back
another
there.
question on public safety? Yes, sure, come forward, yes.
I just had a couple of questions on the police budget. I noticed, as the last speaker stated, that it's pretty stable right across the board. Are there any, is this the budget that the police have asked for, the police department themselves?
Yes.
That's an affirmative.
So,
Has there been any discussion amongst the selectmen or select persons to increase that budget to assist with the new training facility that was created by?
we've not talked yet about the new training facility, but when I think it was during this fall, last fall, we talked at length both with the fire and police department about their budget requests, and you know, the constraints are constant in terms of asking all of our departments, including police and fire, to stay within the constraints of Proposition 2.5. So they feel pressure on that. And
I know they do.
our board has talked with them about that and asked what additional expenditures might be appropriate for the future. At this time, we're not recommending any increases, but you know, eventually the impact of inflation on expenses is felt. Impact on overtime is felt as a result of continual, you know, restraint in those areas. So we are responsive to that. I think our board has asked those questions, but there are always pressures.
Chairman,
yes.
if I may add
Yes.
something that's pretty relevant to this conversation. Article 14, to the chairman's point, one of the things that we've heard from both police and fire was the great pressure on the overtime situation. So among things that we've done to help alleviate that is to adjust our hiring policies such that, like in the police instances, they can now hire fully trained, already academy-trained police officers, as opposed to going from scratch. Saves us some money. But one of the big drivers of overtime was on-the-job injuries. So when a police or firefighter is injured on the job, we have to pay their full wage package out of the line item, and they get backfilled typically by overtime. So we did an analysis of the typical types of duration of these injuries. Article 14 represents what we believe to be a scenario that'll give us a little bit of relief. Right now, we're going to try this out. This allows us to, if passed at town meeting, for extenuating leaves, and we've had employees on leave for up to 2 years that they were unable to come back to the job, and they were backfilled for that period of time on overtime. At a certain point in time, that Article 14 fund could be tapped, and then the wage would come out of that line item, such it would alleviate the pressure on the normal police and fire budget. And that would be for extraordinary circumstances where an employee is out for a period of, really extended period of time. And that does happen, and that's been one of the incremental steps. We're funding that with a free cash request to try something different. There is no insurance. You can buy insurance where it's very costly. It's not a workers' comp situation like the rest of town staff. So this is one issue. The other issue that we've been addressing with both departments is we have to look at creative ways to get to that point where there's great pressure on wage and there's great pressure on expenses with inflationary measures and whatnot. And it's a balancing act, but the Board of Selectmen has been very supportive of our requests to date. We've done some things in the past. We put money aside to buy ammunition ahead of time, security issues. So we continue to do that to try to make sure that we're covering it to the extent that we can.
Yeah, I just get very concerned about our police force and our law enforcement in the community. Just on paper in the last 3 or 4 days, just today, we had a number of different situations where people were arrested and picked up, and there should be budget increases. When I look across the line item and I see it's been stabilized at $100,000 for a period of time, just in the anti-crime prevention training portion of it alone, I don't see why we could not find somewhere in the budget to increase even 10,000, give them an extra 10% in that area to keep our officers much better trained, and or utilizing your theory, Mr. Administrator, is to hire people at standard police rates rather than tapping into overtime. I think that would eliminate things, and if you're going in that direction and you're looking at that as a way to offset the overtime, that's a great plan, I think. But I also think that you should look at trying to, even if they haven't requested it, look at increasing training for our officers, because it protects all of us in the community.
Can I just want to say a few things to that. I think your point's well taken. It's something that this board struggles with a lot. I think, and I know the chief's behind you and he's ready to speak, but I think to the extent possible, this board and the town of Yarmouth has always supported its public safety. So we're very fortunate about that. I'd say probably 3 years ago, or maybe even 4, I'm not sure how many years the proactive crime unit, that was at 50,000. The training was at 50,000. So while you maybe don't see it here, we have made some progress in working that into the budget. So it's not something, for years he had to come, and it was, if we had the money available, it was in free cash. So we've made a little bit of progress. As far as the training facility goes, our town works on a 5-year capital plan. And I know in light of what's happened over the past year, this has been very much expedited and very needed. But the process that we go through with capital, it doesn't just come here and we say, oh yeah, let's fund that. It goes through and I know there's people from the Capital Budget Committee probably here tonight. We have a plan for what gets implemented when. If we try to implement everything at one time as a town, it really would burden our taxpayers. So this year, when it came forward, I'm pretty sure it was not yet on our capital plan for this year. It doesn't mean that the chief isn't in talks with them for possibly the next year's budget. We haven't got that far, but it certainly was not something that was approved by the Capital Budget Committee for this year.
No, I appreciate that fully, and I understand what you're saying. If there are funds that are being utilized for training in other areas that is not displayed, I guess I would, just as a taxpayer, like to see somewhere a notation or a footnote that denotes that, so we all know as a community that there are monies being set aside.
Well, we're very fortunate. We have a very well-trained police force. Unfortunately, very awful things happen, and it's not in this board's interest or our town's interest to ever go through what we went through again. So certainly it's on the forefront of all of our minds.
I know that for a fact, and I'm not criticizing this board whatsoever.
No, I don't take it that way. I'm just trying to explain our process. Our process started. The budget process started, I don't even know how many months ago, but the capital budget in terms of the training facility started, long before that. And like I said, it's a 5-year project. So, it's a 5-year plan that we implement as needed. Actually, we have probably a 10-year plan.
We have a 10-year plan as well.
So it's wherever it falls in. And unfortunately, it's probably not as front-loaded as a lot of people would like it to be. We're very fortunate to have a lot of private donations, but as far as the town, we're hoping that maybe next year there'll be a presentation of the capital budget and we can start working on that.
In the capital budget, can you tell me?
We're going to get to the capital budget here. It's separate from the operating.
Okay, I just wanted to know where the cycle was. That would have been my question.
And there are other pieces that Mr. Knappich talked about that from free cash, that's a one-time expenditure that is for the police department, that is elsewhere in the budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Chief, did you want to make some comments?
I'll be brief because it's going to be a long night. It's just a point of clarification. When we submit a budget, it's not really what we want. We're given guidelines to go by.
You sure about that?
I'm pretty certain. And, everybody in this room, all the department heads get the same directive.
Right.
And it's tough. When you look, you're making a great point. When you look at trying to keep flat level spending on expenses, and if you look back in anyone's budget over the past, 10 years, those lines are just very slowly creeping up. But it's something we try to live by. We at the police department, we've been fortunate to have a lot of good support. And there's a lot more to do, and it's not because we just think we want everything. Some of the stuff is necessary. And I can tell you, that I am going to make sure my officers get what they need. I'm going to ask for cooperation, and because I'm not going to sleep at night, knowing what I've already been through, and make sure I do the right presentations in the right manner to get what they need, because they deserve it. And I appreciate the support I got, but I just want to let you know that we work hard, like everybody else here, to work within the budget and the directives we are given. And we do everything else to try to get community support to help us in other areas. And we're going to continue to do that, because we have a community that deserves it, and they want it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. All right, we're going to move on to municipal inspections. This is the next item on page 5. We're almost through the budget here. Excuse me. Municipal inspections includes the building inspector's offices and the Board of Health, and the total expenses there budgeted for 2020 are $1,309,699. And then information technology is the next item shown on page 5, and that's detailed with expenses totaling $834,654. And then at the bottom of page 5 and on to page 6 are details with regard to public works, starting with the administrative expenses at the bottom of page 5 for public works, and then going into the highway department, snow and ice, facilities expenses, sanitation, parks, and cemetery expenses. So the total expenses for public works budgeted for 2020 is $6,321,186. Almost half of that is related to sanitation, as you could see, $2,745,000. So just in terms of significance, highway wages are $810,000. So those two areas, sanitation and highway, account for over half of the total public works budget. And then on page, any questions on public? Yes, Chris.
I just wanted some clarification at the bottom of page 5. When you go from the expenses from 61,000 to 500,000, what are the things that are now? I know you said that you were going to move things from other accounts, remove them and show them more correctly underlined. What are now included under that department that rose it from 61 to 500,000?
Which department was that?
This is on the bottom of page 5, Public Works, Administrative Engineering.
Line PW2.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Again, Jeff Colby, Public Works Director. Both Dan and Chris mentioned this before, and that is the fuel and the street lights that have been moved into DPW admin. Those are the expenses associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, did I see, go ahead, Vita. Sure.
Under the Municipal Operations Information Technology, the expenses have risen from the current year to the proposed FY20 up by $190,000, and I'm wondering what that is for. On page 5.
That increase represents mainly a lot of infrastructure needs that the town needs, and for many years probably should have kept up with at a more appropriate clip. We realized a lot of the infrastructure shortcomings, if you will, certainly during the Great Flood last year when our server room was down here, and we almost essentially went out of business from a technology standpoint. So in general, the increase is related to our networking, our servers, a lot of our infrastructure to essentially make sure that we can continue to conduct business here in the town efficiently and as effectively as possible.
Did you have to replace quite a few of the computers or whatever else that you use as a result of the flood?
There were replacement costs, but they were largely covered under insurance. But this is for, this represents an assessment of our current and future needs.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That covers DPW at this point. The last item on page 6 is debt service, and the total debt service costs for fiscal '20 is $953,000. And then on top of page 7, it shows the grand total of all the wages for the municipal government at $22,689,000, and other expenses totaling $16,445,000, for a grand total of $39,135,000. So that covers the entire municipal budget at this point. Are there any other questions on that at this stage? Okay. We'll move on to Article 3. We're going to skip over some other areas in the meantime as we go through, or just kind of highlight things. But the total golf budget is right. Yeah, I think so. Thank you. All right, we'll go on to let's see.
Article 4 at the bottom of the page.
Article 4 at the bottom of the page. Yes. I'm sorry, that's the Water Department Special Revenue Operating Budget. So the fiscal 2020 water operating budget provides funding for the operation of the Yarmouth water system. And you can see on the top of page 8, the expenses are detailed for the Water Department, totaling $4,392,404. And of course, all of that is funded through fees to the individual users of water. So that budget is balanced in total based upon the fees that are collected. We'll proceed on to Article 5, and that is the septage enterprise account. As I think most people are aware in town, we operate a septage treatment plant which accepts material from across the Cape from a variety of towns and processes it. I don't know, Jeff, do you want to talk about that at all at this stage?
Not unless there's questions.
No, all right. Again, as an enterprise fund, again, the plant operates at least break even, and in fact has been operating at a profit in the last number of years. The expenses are shown on the bottom of page 8, a total of $2,156,801, and again covered by estimated revenues of the same amount. So unless there are any questions, no questions on, we'll proceed on to Article 6. And Selectman Post will introduce that article.
Sure. Article 6 is related to the regional agreement of the school district. The explanation that's in the warrant, I'll just read it for those that might be listening at home. The Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School Committee voted in March to revise the two-town regional district agreement. The revisions include updates in how operating costs are assessed, the apportionment of funding for the new and existing capital facilities, and it says and filling vacancies in the school committee, but I'm almost positive that that's been removed from the conversation. Since the entire, I guess, I don't know if you want me to get into the whole detail. The Regional School Committee prepared a new regional agreement. The regional agreement has to be approved by the DESE, which is the Department of Education, Secondary Education, I think. It became too cumbersome in such a short period of time for them to review it in its entirety as it was amended. So recently, the school committee had taken a vote to pull out Section 4. So if you're reading, there is a link in our warrant to the entire new or proposed regional agreement. Section 4 related to the funding is the only one that will be discussed at town meeting, so there will be an amendment on the floor. And basically what it does is it takes the new agreement is predicated on a foundation formula, which means all of the students that are paid for by the taxpayers in Dennis and Yarmouth, meaning when our agreement that's in place now was implemented many years ago, choice and charter really were not on the radar. So the choice and charter really aren't taken into effect into how those costs are delineated. In the new agreement, it will base the assessments on the foundation, which includes all of the students that we're paying for. So that's one change. The other change is the capital costs. And everybody knows we're looking potentially to build a new 4 to 7 school that will take the place of both Wixon and Mattakees. And the proposed agreement is a fixed cost for capital that is 65-35, meaning the taxpayers of Yarmouth would be responsible for 65 and the taxpayers of Dennis 35. Right now, that too is also predicated on the assessments. So right now it's split by student population, and our student population is now, I want to say, probably 68 to 69% Yarmouth, and every year. So we'll get to the actual operating account later, which shows that 74 more students next year or last year are Yarmouth's responsibility. So Dennis lost students, Yarmouth gained students. So while that costs us in the capital, it also, in the operating, it also, the way that our agreement is now, it shifts those percentages to capital. So every year we have a little bit of a problem budgeting because when those shifts like that happen, 74 students is a couple of percentage points. So that is a lot of money that shifts from one town to the other. So having a fixed cost, I think, is helpful for all of us for planning, and that's something we're looking for. And as far as the operating costs, there is a schedule that's printed in the warrant. The schedule is part of Section 4, and it also this is the section that we will be discussing at town meeting, but just for the sake of people that don't have it in front of them, what the proposal is for FY20, the operating cost would be 32% for Dennis and 68% for Yarmouth, and it goes from 68 to 65. For Yarmouth, and from 32 to 35 over the next 5 years. And it will remain there. So what we do know is that the census shows that the population will continue to decline in Dennis, shifting the burden of the cost to Yarmouth. We think that there's, and I'm not sure, you'll probably let the school committee and Mr. Jenks perhaps speak to this, but I think the consensus of our board is that there's a great benefit to partnering. You get more for your money, basically, if you have more population, and as the overall population of the school does decline, we need to try to control costs to the best that we can. We've had, this year will be, I think, our 5th year in a row for an override. And so I have to be really careful here to how I'm going to say this. But, so we do know that there are a lot of benefits to the partnership. One of, some of them being the arts and the sports and the music programs and the other things that we're able to provide. And you can do it more affordable with a higher number of students. So We're hopeful that, this is something that this board has worked on for probably about 10 years, off and on. And ultimately, the school committee had made the final proposal. It's within their purview to put it before the voters. Hopefully, the voters in both towns will see the benefit of this proposal for the future of our district together and for the stability in planning and budgeting for everybody involved. We won't get into the details of how we feel specific to costs, but we do know that when you're an individual town and you have a school district, there are a lot of costs that you bear on your own. Superintendent, all the way down from electricity to health benefits and all of your teachers. But then the building itself, there are things that you would have to have if you built your own building that is not specific to the number of students, particularly in a building. So we feel that this is a fair deal for the taxpayers. We obviously had been negotiating for a long time, and as it's been said many times, not everybody will leave happy, but we think to the extent possible for a potential new building and the future of the district, that we're hopeful that the people of Yarmouth will support this and the people of Dennis, so we could put the past behind us, move forward with a new facility, and move our district forward.
Okay, questions? Yes, Chris?
When is the Dennis town meeting, and what happens if they don't approve this to us?
Doesn't go.
It doesn't go, but is there a town meeting before or after ours? What we know?
Ours is on May 4th. Theirs is the Tuesday after the 7th.
Thank you.
Yes.
That has to pass in both towns. And
it has to pass exactly in the same wording. So amending from the floor of, tweaks that somebody may want to see, while this isn't perfect and it's not everything that we wanted to accomplish at this time, we'll have to go back at it later because the DESC reviews it, and once they approve it, it can't be amended. Maybe Joe or...
Joe, did you want to make, I'm sorry to single you out, you or Ken, I guess, would, if you wanted to make any comments, that'd be fine.
Thank you very much. Tracy, that was perfect, that presentation. I think it was spot on. And I'm happy to see in the warrant it's printed as it was. As you discussed, there were a number, about 13 things our subcommittee brought to DESE to have them go over and look at. They came back with a recommendation that we narrow it down to Section 4, and that's what they said. If you just Section 4 looks okay. If you just vote on Section 4 now, we should be in good shape. All the other things are still being reviewed. The regional agreement subcommittee is not done doing their work. The Department of Education said, please continue on down the road in reviewing that and going over things that are in process with DESE and other things. So it's a work in progress, but I feel this is a fair and equitable solution to this. We had a forum in Dennis last night, and it was, I felt, a pretty productive meeting. There was a pretty, back and forth about discussion about it. I know one of the things that they said is, why are we paying more and having less children? And we tried to explain to them exactly what you said, Tracy. We're better off together than apart. The programs that we can have, you mentioned sports and the arts. There's virtual classroom where our students go and go into a classroom and learn with other students from the Ukraine and in China and things like that. And there's a lot of different opportunities that a small school district would not have. So trying to get Dennis and Yarmouth to realize we're better together than apart. And then as far as the capital costs, the 6535 was just we took the numbers and we looked at those, and we bounced it around. A lot of this came out of the work that the original subcommittee did on that. So,
well, the subcommittee identified, I think it was a list of about $3 million in basic operating that.
1.9.
1.9 million. I'm sorry. it'll be 3 million next year. No. But those were costs that were identified that each we would have regardless of student population.
Correct.
So I think that even though it's not that particular number, this percentage represents that more overall in a more stable way than instead of trying to pull out and identify those each year.
Right.
And I think, I've listened to I watched the Dennis Board of Selectmen meeting, and I've listened to them discuss the point about the increased number or the cost per pupil. I went back and, I went on the DESE website, and anytime you have a small school district, I think about Provincetown. Provincetown, before they years ago, 2014, they were paying upwards of about $30,000 per pupil.
Right.
And that's just the reality of what the cost is when you have such a small population, because it costs more to educate than when you have less. So I think the numbers work. It's hard to, I guess right now, I want to ask you how we can help move this forward, but I'd also like to see if we can come up with maybe a fact sheet or some type of education for the voters overall that will be able to look at this and say, this makes sense.
Sure, we can have a handout for town meeting prepared, and so you can something small, just to kind of give an outline of percentages and things like that. I don't know if it'd be important to go too deep. We can explain all that and go into it. You said it. You talked about Provincetown, but if you look down the Cape a little bit more, and a good example is Chatham and Harwich when they combined as Monomoy. The Chatham principal said she couldn't do half of the programs that she's able to do now with her students from Chatham if it wasn't that they combined with Monomoy. And they're having their issues over there. They're having just as hard of a time over there.
I think part of the dynamic, and it was touched on last evening in the meeting in Dennis, is in two-town regional districts, and that is regional districts where there's just two towns, it's extremely difficult because if there are changes in student population, one town gains, the other town loses, and that's the same thing in terms of budgets. One town has reductions in expenses, the other town has increases in expenses. And whereas if you have 5 or 6 towns, everything kind of gets smoothed out over time, and the gyrations are not as significant for one town or another. So we're in a very difficult environment, and I thought a lot about it in terms of what happens with when one town, could be Dennis, could be Yarmouth, loses one student. Well, that's a $15,000 to $20,000 reduction in the amount of money that goes into the district to fund education. Somebody's got to pay for that. The expenses of running the district don't go down typically. They may go down a little bit, but they're not going to go down that entire amount. So what happens is that burden shifts over to the other town. Now, in our case, over the last 15 years, enrollment has gone from about 4,000 students down to 3,000. And the proportion of students between Dennis and Yarmouth has changed even more than that reduction. So there's been shifting of expenses from one town to another that has made it very difficult, especially here in Yarmouth. And I know the district is worried about it because it creates continual stress on Yarmouth budgets and Yarmouth taxpayers if we're constantly asking for overrides. So, it's not an easy subject, and it's and I think you have to take the long road view and say, okay, we know that we're better operating together. We have a better school system overall if we're operating together, and try to come up with a fair arrangement that does not disadvantage one town or another during that process. So.
That's great. Two words came out of our school committee subcommittee meeting, and there are two words that you folks had asked us is predictability. Like you said, you can't predict when you have 75 more kids, how are you going to pay for it? And smoothing. So by doing this, with a 5-year change of just a little bit, it kind of smooths it out over 5 years. Instead of going from 32% up to 35 right away, for Dennis having to, that's a tough thing. So that's why we smoothed it out to that amount, and predictability. Both towns want to know what their costs can be, so we can help predict, and you can help predict in the future. So, thank you.
All right, thank you.
You probably want to stay there, because we're going to.
That's fine.
Probably talk about operating.
All right, we'll move along. Page 10 in the warrant is Article 7. I think, Tracy, you're up on that one again.
Yep, Article 7 is related to what I mentioned earlier, which is the school operating budget. So I'm going to read the explanation. This article funds the town share of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District for the FY20 assessment is based upon the revised agreement. This assessment represents a 4.2% increase over last year to the town of Yarmouth. Now, I have to say, while that is the explanation and that is accurate, their budget overall did stay within, I believe, the 2.5%. What was the percentage? 2.53%. The reason that I stated earlier about the shift in the students is why our particular percentage is at the 4.2%, while there was a reduction, actually less than 2%, that went to Dennis because of the shift. But we talked about it with the chief earlier. We put our budget parameters out at the beginning of every year that we ask all of our departments, and we send a letter also to the school district that we ask that they stay within the 2.5%, because by law that's what we're allowed to raise on property taxes. So we try to live within that budget. The 4.2%, like I said, has to do with the 74 students shifting to us. So as it does say that this 35 million certified for FY20, it's 35,298,335. That was our assessment given to us from the school district. That assessment is based on the factors that I gave you in the proposed agreement. So they were hopeful that the new agreement would pass. So this number with the new agreement, the change or the shift, I guess, from the foundation represents about $400,000. So if it wasn't for the new agreement for FY20, this number would include $400,000 more. So that $400,000 transitioned to Dennis's budget this year. So hopefully the budget or in the new agreement in Dennis will pass. So that way that $400,000 is funded, because if it doesn't, then there's a delta from the school district. This number represents what we'll get into in Article 8, which is, oh no, that's different. But so what this does, though, is we have funded a portion of this, which was our number from last year, plus 2.5%. But there is about a $600,000 delta in this certified number, meaning delta meaning yes, yep.
Increase?
Nope,
Change?
nope. It's more than that. It's, well, you can see what the difference is from FY19 to FY20.
Okay.
FY19 was 33,973, 474. FY20 is 35,298, 335. So we have budgeted for all but $600,000 of that. So $600,000 of that will go to a Proposition 2.5 override that will be on the ballot if this is approved at town meeting on May 21st. So it's kind of complicated this year. There's a lot of moving pieces, but we won't know what will happen in Dennis until after our town meeting is complete. but we will have to go to the ballot to fully fund that number. I don't know where our, okay, here it is. So in Article 7 here, it says, the town, it's the same number, but we're going to move to raise and appropriate $34,696,926 to fund the assessed share of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School budget for fiscal year 2020. And that also raise and appropriate an additional $601,409 to fully fund the assessment, and hereby approve the district's budget for FY 20, provided, however, that such an appropriation is contingent to approval of a Proposition 2.5. So basically what I'm saying is the $34,696,926 is what's funded through our regular operating budget, which has been budgeted for the school, and we still have a difference of the $600,000. So fortunately, we don't have $1 million difference, because but for a proposed new agreement, we would be looking at $1 million override.
All right. Any questions on the school budget at this point? Yes, Vita?
Just want to see if my thinking is correct. If the schools were doing, I guess, what would approximate zero-based budgeting, and they knew that the only increase they would get to their budget for the following year will be 2.5%. In both instances, drop all the formulas. That would be the fairest way of funding the schools, wouldn't it? And it would, be very predictable, and we wouldn't have to worry about what will come out of what formula and what have you. I mean, am I correct? If they have to hold on to, to the 2.5% increase.
Well, you're basically correct, but what that doesn't account for is shifts in student population, and that's what's complicating things. The school's budget for this year, as Ken Jenks indicated, is 2.53% higher than last year. But as a result of the student shift, Yarmouth's increase is 4% and change, and I'm not sure what Dennis's increase is. It's something less than 2.5%, but you understand what I'm saying? So the school budget is not going up more than 2.5%, but as a result of the student shift in enrollment, Yarmouth's increase, even with a revised agreement, is going up about 4%.
I know that, but if I guess I'm having trouble figuring out. I just thought that the 2.5% increase, that if they have to stay within that, if we have more students, I guess we would be liable for. But they still have to stay within the 2.5%. So.
That's our request. They don't have to. They're their own entity. Yeah. So
no, I'm just saying if people were reasonable and accepted that. Basically, Dennis is not willing to accept that. That's as far as I understand, because you do away with formulas and chips and whatever. I just wanted to get that straightened out.
And we got really lucky this year. I think one of the things that saved the district is a lot of money, and the town ourselves was. We have a municipal health group, and that was level from last year to this year, and that was $400,000 in savings to the district, Ken? Yes. It was about $400,000 to the district. So thank goodness for that, because next year that increase will probably be there for both the town and the district, and so we'll have to figure out how we're going to fund that as well.
All right, why don't we move on to Article 8? That's the District Stabilization Fund, and Article 9 is the Cape Cod Technical High School Assessment.
So the Article 8 is a stabilization fund. This is allowed by Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16G and a half, which is interesting. We have a stabilization fund. I think most municipalities have a stabilization fund, and the district is asking to set up their own stabilization fund. So if and when they have the ability to fund such an account, they would put some money into there, and then if something major or some type of emergency happened in the middle of the year, they'd have the ability to be able to use that. So what they're asking is, they voted on January 14th, 2019, to request it be put on the warrant. And the purpose of the fund is to have money available to pay for emergencies and capital repair. If established, 2/3 vote of the school committee would be required in order to spend money from the fund. So we all know these things happen in the course of a year. And right now, it comes out of their operating budget. So if something like a roof or a boiler or something happens in the middle of the year, you don't have a choice but to fix it. And what ends up happening is they have to cut educationally. So they're not asking for any money to be put into this account at this time. They're just setting it there. Maybe, like I said, in the future, they'd have the ability to fund it. But they're preparing for that, so that way that they can be more prepared for an emergency situation.
And then Article 9?
Okay, Article 9 is the Cape Tech budget. So the explanation is, well, first of all, the budget for FY20 for Yarmouth is $2,292,475, and it's basically to fund the town's share of the Cape Cod Technical High School.
Okay. Any questions? All right, we'll move on from there. Article 10, which is on page 11 of the warrant, is a lengthy list of capital expenditures, and Selectman Stone will lead the discussion.
Thank you. There's going to be a transfer from fire reserve of $540,000, and from the recycling fund another $76,000, and a raise and appropriate for $2,977,881. Excuse me, for a total appropriation of $3,593,881 to fund those various items, which start on page 11 and go through the next page about halfway down. You can see the total Article 10 funding sources. The various specifics are on that first page on 11, which are, if you look at the major items, Highway has a regenerative vacuum sweeper for $284,000, and there's a IT upgrade of $100,000. Waterways, dredging, and beach nourishment is $100,000. A patrol boat with an engine and trailer is $200,000. And then you find various items for the police. The gentleman was speaking before about, ways to help the police department. Here's some examples. Vehicle replacements, $120,000. Body armor, $90,000. Radio system upgrades, $250,000. And then there's various items from the schools. That page totals $1.5 million. And that's from the routine capital budget, all coming from the tax levy. And that's been the goal of the capital budget to, and there hasn't been the money to employ that, to reach that figure consistently, but the target goal per year is to spend about $1.5 million on capital budget items. On the next page, you have roadway improvement from the tax levy. There was, I believe that was from an override that was passed several years ago, and that's a recurring, it was actually 5 years ago. The base amount was funded by an override, and 1.275 664 is expended every year to keep the road system in a good state of repair. And then you have $76,000 of waste management capital from the recycling fund, and you have various capital from fire receipts to replace an ambulance for $290,000, fire gear and equipment of $150,000, and a Pierce pumper of $100,000 for a total fire of $540,000. Again, the total of all of these items is about $3.6 million. I don't know if anyone has any questions. We have.
Budget? Yes, Peter. Yes.
As long as I get the answers now, it's going to be flying
Town meeting's
time
gonna be hours.
at the town meeting. That's what I'm glad to have this opportunity. The patrol boat, how many boats does the town own? Because it seems to me several town departments or entities seem to own their own boats.
I see Carl coming forward.
Well, thank you for the question. The Division of Natural Resources under the Harbor Master Department has 3 patrol boats in operation. We also have a pump-out boat that deals with marine waste that was purchased through a grant. We also have 2 skiffs and 1 work barge that we deploy the buoys and shellfish gear. So we have numerous boats. The fire department also has a boat stationed in Bass River, and they have 2 other vessels that they can trailer for emergencies.
It seems like an awful lot of boats for a town.
Awful lot of water.
A lot of water.
Yeah. We do have a lot of water. But you have to realize a number of these boats are specialized boats that are utilized, the barge is utilized for hoisting buoys and anchors out of the water. Can't be used for really anything else. Some of the other small skiffs are used for water sampling and getting into shallow water. Our patrol boats and the fire boat are used for search and rescue and routine patrols.
Is this a new boat?
It's a replacement boat of a boat that's, I believe, going on 15 years old right now and is in need of serious replacement, so we can't rely on it to perform public safety duties.
Okay. I have one more question.
Thank you.
This is for the police. The radio system upgrade for the police department, is that in cars or the 911 system, or what is that?
Chief's going to take that question.
Thank you.
Chief, go ahead. I didn't know you were still here.
Oh, of course. I didn't want to miss this. The radio system upgrade is vital. We've been talking about it for a number of years. The state is changing the system. Matter of fact, meeting tomorrow with a representative from the state to maybe help us out with the projects that is happening across the Commonwealth. So last year, we had all the portables replaced for the department. This year, it's the servers within the building that run the radio system. They're on life support right now, so this is we keep our fingers crossed every day. So that has to be done. It was going to have to be done anyway with the conversion of the state system, which is still, every time we talk to them, well, we're 2 years out. We're 2 years out, but this is going on for like 6 years. So they called me 2 days ago that said they want to talk to us about some good information they got. There's been, of course, a new tax that was put on people's cell phones, you may not know, that is going to help fund the system. Cost us, that's not all of it, just some of it. That's what he's going to give us some information on. But this piece here will be for the servers that have to be replaced. That'll allow us for the get the next phase of the new system in.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have about 50 minutes before all of us turn into pumpkins up here. So I'm going to jump over a few articles and hit some of the ones that at least I think are important. But if there's some interest out there in a particular one that I happen to have skipped, just raise your hand and we'll address it. So I'm going to try to move forward a little more quickly so we get through everything. I'm going to jump over, and I don't mean to avoid other select board members' participation, but I'm going to jump over the water department since I think we know the funds are provided through our fees, and that's in Article 11. Article 12, it has to do with raises that we're contractually obligated to. Article 13 has to do with quote-unquote free cash. Don't get the wrong idea. There's nothing free. Free cash is a terminology that in municipal government means that the municipal operations had a surplus in the previous year. Either revenues were higher than expected or expenses were lower than expected, or both. And the sum of that money is available to the town to be voted on by the voters, by the taxpayers, to be used. It could be used to reduce taxes, or it could be used for special expenditures. Article 13 gives the taxpayers at town meeting the opportunity to make decisions on where that money is going to be used. So it's detailed on the bottom of page 13, a number of different areas where expenditures will be made, and continues on to page 14, all the way down through to a total of $1,364,000. And as you can see, the major items included in that, I'm not going to deal with all of those, but these are individual requests for taxpayer approval on recommended expenditures.
Why don't you comment on that? Why don't you comment on the school bonding anticipatory note?
Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
Go ahead.
I'm not
I
going to
just
talk
think
about
it's
it.
one of the major items.
Would you like to, comment on that?
Yep. Selectman Stone on page 14 is referring to an item for the sum of $282,026. It's referred to as the school bond anticipatory note. So because the Mattakey School Building passed a ballot question, we were notified by the school district that as the project has proceeded, obviously it's under some stoppage now, but if it were to continue, it's likely the town would be served with the sum of $282,026 to pay for short-term interest associated with borrowing for that project. Because we would have no way to absorb that in any of our other funding sources associated with the levy, it's a typical way to do this would be to put it into the free cash. So if that bill does come due at the next fiscal year at any time, we'll be able to access the money and pay the debt as we're obligated to. So I don't know, it's supposed to come due in January. I'm not sure if that'll happen, but at some point in time, if it does come due in fiscal 20, we'll have the money to cover our share of that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, is there a question?
The Council on Aging, the $50,000, what is that for?
My understanding for that is we're going to expand our hours of transportation for folks. I do know, like, we have plans to
No, that's okay. As long as it's not for new toilets.
No, it's,
That's-
no.
Thank
it's-
you. That's it. That's all.
Transportation to get more seniors to services.
All right, all right. All right, I'm going to skip over Article 14. Dan talked a little bit about that earlier.
I think Frank wants to say something. Did you want?
Yeah, I'm good. That's a great article.
Thank you, okay. All right, so you heard the recommendation from Frank on Article 14, all right.
I agree.
Article 15 is, I guess, kind of a housekeeping article, but it does transfer funds into stabilization, and that's from surplus funds that were generated during the year. So, I'm sorry, did I misstate
You don't have to
that?
move the question here, Dorcas.
Thank you. All right, then Article 16, how am I'm getting confused now between Article 15 and 16. Someone help me along here?
Yeah, Article 15, so there's going to be a sum of money left over from free cash,
Okay.
even after the free cash articles, if they
And
were
that's
to
going to
pass.
put the remainder in there?
Yeah, so
All
you
right.
could take that delta, whatever comes off of that conversation, and put it into 15.
Okay, that's fine.
That account could be used to offset capital incurrement, like for a DPW building, as a for instance, where Article 16 is related to this town stabilization account. And one of the things that the finance director had recommended is to signal to the credit entities that we would front-load $1 million from free cash to put into the stabilization account to ensure our AA rating status would continue. There's also an additional $100,000 that we picked up, and I believe Mr. Dwelly has the extra $100,000.
Yeah, there's $100,000, which is the end of a $300,000 loan from the fire department.
For the fire vehicle, yeah.
All right, so the end result of all this is, in Article 16, is that after allocating this $1.1 million of surplus funds to stabilization, is that we end up with $4,293,787 in our stabilization fund. And that's set aside and reserved for future years in which perhaps economic conditions will not be as good as they are now, and where tax receipts from things like automobile registrations or rooms and meals taxes, things of that nature, will drop. Then the town may need to use some of those stabilization funds so that we don't have to go back and generate taxes. So that's the whole purpose, not the whole purpose. The stabilization funds can be voted by the taxpayers for use for other purposes, but one of the primary things is to stabilize taxes over a longer period of time. So that fund will amount to, after this article, to $4.3 million.
Mr. Chairman, maybe also add that this also improves the town's position in terms of its bond rating, which results in more favorable rates when they have to go out and bond particular projects.
That's right, and particularly if we're going to be, and certainly we're going to have a number of different bonding requirements in future years, not even considering a potential $117 million school. And a change of 0.25% or 0.5% in interest rates, going from a AA rating down to a slightly lower rating, can be significant in terms of long-term interest costs. So it's important for us to maintain our bond ratings. Yes, Mr. Centio.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, our rating is AA+.
AA+, thank you, thank you.
You're very proud of that, and you should be.
Thank you.
And looking at AAA down the road.
All right. Article 18, withdrawn. Article 19, and is an amendment to allow us to have 2 town meetings a year, basically. I believe this is the article, is it not? Yes. And what the board was trying to accomplish with this article is to help us to streamline our town meetings, to have one town meeting that deals with a lot of the financial issues, and perhaps some of the other administrative issues could be dealt with at a fall town meeting. That's done in municipalities throughout the Commonwealth. I think Dennis has 2 town meetings a year. So, and that was a recommendation of a committee that we had on trying to improve the attendance at our town meetings. Article 20, 21 are both withdrawn, and then Article 22 deals with wastewater planning, and again, a $200,000 appropriation to deal with planning of our wastewater. I'm not sure who's assigned that.
Jeff Colby.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, this is such a significant issue for the town. I think you should at least talk about the planning effort at this stage.
Certainly. Again, Jeff Colby, Public Works Director. This is to continue to fund the design work through our consultant, which is CDM Smith, both for permitting of the updated plan and updating our plan once it's finally determined if we're partnering with Dennis in Harwich or whether we're going alone. There's also some components of modeling for recharge at the Bass River Golf Course for where the disposal of the treated effluent might go. So those are the major items associated with this particular article. This is similar to the funds that were approved in the last 2 town meetings to support that ongoing effort. There's also some engineering that's going to happen relative to working with our consultant in advance of some of the Mass DOT projects that are happening along Route 28 to make sure that we're properly designed and coordinated with those activities.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask?
Thank you.
The towns are paying.
Yes.
These kind of fees, you know?
I don't know the precise numbers off the top of my head, but in our discussions with Dennis and Harwich, they are also appropriating similar funds to continue the discussions with our 3 towns.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any questions on wastewater? I mean, a lot is going on, but especially between Harwich, Dennis, and Yarmouth. A partnership is being structured to address the wastewater needs on a tri-town basis, and we're working very hard to put that partnership together. I think there's another article in here someplace having to do with the legislation. Is it in this?
No.
No, it's not in this. I stand corrected.
In the fall.
In the fall, yeah.
All right, in the fall. All right.
Somebody here, Mr. Chairman. Wave a hand.
Yes, of course.
What is the scheduling for the agreement? Because I know it's very important we stay on schedule with the state work that's going on. What is the schedule that the 3 towns are supposed to meet? What's the deadline?
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that we have a meeting with Dennis and Harwich on Friday, or tomorrow, and we'll talk in that meeting about the next tri-town meeting when we bring the water advisory committees together with the finance committees and the Board of Selectmen. That is tentatively looking like in June. The legislative delegation has not yet had an opportunity to get the legislative document approved. We did make a tweak recently, some very slight language modification to satisfy 2 of our partners here on that topic. So if everything goes right up in Boston, we should have all 3 towns at their fall town meetings having an opportunity to vote on an agreement. That's the plan right now towards the fall. Not sure when, though.
In sync with the state work.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can't do the agreement until the legislation, the home rule legislation passes, so, or the special act. So once that passes, then we can move forward on the agreement.
Okay. We're on page 16, Article 23, and as you can see, the Page 17 includes a whole bunch of articles that have been withdrawn, all the way down through Article 30. And then we go into a series of CPA-related articles, and would...
Karen Green we have here, and
Yeah.
Mr. Gary Ellis here today.
Yeah, would you folks like to...
And we have Mike Berry, who's been administrating the program.
Okay. Would you like to introduce, I mean, you're going to be doing this at town meeting, right? The introduction of the articles? Trying to put you on the spot, Gary.
Yeah, I really don't know what to say. I mean, the first article is for our 10% going into each category as required by law. Next, we have for housing, we go into affordable housing. We have $288,000, which we've done every year to the Affordable Housing Trust, which is run by the town. We have 3 articles. Excuse me?
Does that have a specific purpose?
Mary can explain. Mary can talk about the projects that they are doing and have done. So yeah, it's a number of different purposes.
So, hi, Mary Wagon. Regarding Article 32, Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, those funds are provided to the trust to preserve and create affordable housing, serving low, moderate income households either at an affordable price or affordable rent.
So Mary...
280, is it for some specific purpose? I understand.
No, it isn't. The reason we created the housing trust is so that when we have an opportunity to either create or preserve a property without waiting a year and losing the property, that the town would have the funds available. And that's what they've been using it for. So it's not for a specific project, but when one becomes available, we don't have to lose it because we have to wait for a year.
Vita, the easiest way to understand that is the money is put into a reserve and for the okay, and then as needs come up, they're addressed. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we have the 3 other affordable housing projects, which is the Harwich Council on Aging, to help income-eligible homeowners for $230,000, Hands of Hope, to provide financial assistance for people with their rent before they get evicted, which is $34,000. And a new project we have this year is Friends or Relatives with Autism and Related Abilities. It's a regional project, which will be funded by Yarmouth, Dennis, Barnstable, Mashpee, and Chatham. And they will be creating a home for autism or related disabilities, and it will be in Dennis. It's off Holcomb Rock Road. So Dennis has actually committed the land itself plus $500,000. So we're asking for $120,000. But, you know, we have the potential of more benefit from this house than as much as Dennis anyways. And Chatham's even committing to it. So it's a regional project.
All right, and then, yes.
Okay.
Chris?
I noticed that in the B and C, you designate Yarmouth and Dennis under A, because it says Harwich. Is that to reserve homes in Yarmouth, or is that a
No,
regional?
Harwich does it, but it's only people from Yarmouth.
Thank you.
Okay. And Article 34 is detailed on page 20, and the individual projects are specified there.
Yeah, those are all the historical projects.
Okay.
So,
and then Article 35.
On Article 35, we will have a meeting, I believe, on Saturday morning to discuss a land acquisition opportunity.
Yes.
And much like we did last year with the Yankee Village parcel, from the floor, you'll have a request to make a motion for the CPA to consider.
Is there,
I don't have the dollar value.
the dollars are not specified yet?
They'll be from the floor, they will be.
we know the dollar amount. We're trying to keep that for us, because hopefully we're going to have a great opportunity to buy this at, we don't want it to get out in public for developers
Okay,
who may.
all right, it's a little premature at this stage.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
But we will by town meeting. We-
Town meeting, correct.
Yep.
Okay, all right. And then
Recreation
Article
is next.
36 is recreation projects, which, again, CPA funds are used for a number of different purposes, including major recreation projects, the first two of which are outlined on the bottom of page 21. And let's see, and I think one that has been a subject of a number of different meetings and is now moving to the forefront is Article 37. You might want to talk about that for a second, Gary.
Yeah, that is for the development of the drive-in property. So we are committing, or would like to commit to $2.2 million this year to continue with doing the engineering, design, and possibly part of the construction. We know it's going to be more expensive for that, but we've spent a lot of time negotiating that dollar amount with the drive-in committee, who we all think has done a wonderful job doing this. So we didn't want to commit the entire dollar amount at this point because we'd like to retain that because they're not going to need it for a few years. So this was to keep that project going, get it designed, and get started with construction. It's for the boardwalk and, you know, the recreation park and the boardwalk that are going down there at the drive-in site.
Okay. You know, this, the drive-in site is a very long running project. The town has owned that property for a couple of decades at this stage, and we are pleased that it's now moving forward, and I think it's going to be a real highlight in that area. So
I think I would hope most people in town would see the benefits of this. It's been long enough, as you said, Norm.
okay, well, yes, Vita, did you have a specific question?
I wanted to go back to Article
Oh, but I thought we were.
No going back.
36. There's apparently the costs for the pickleball courts went up, and what is cited here is higher tariffs on construction materials. Are we buying Chinese materials?
I'm not sure I can answer the question.
Jeff can't wait. No, seriously, well, they're the only ones that are with the tariff.
Yeah. I'm sure we are to some degree, one way or the other, either
In other words, they're
Canadian
selling
or
it
Chinese.
buying
it
it,
could
right?
be.
Not everything, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, not everything is American. But the costs for asphalt as well as other materials has escalated. The bids came in, the bottom line is the bids came in higher than the estimate that we had for the work.
Right. Okay. All right. So 2.2 million being dedicated, yes. Sharon?
Before we leave the other article, I was wondering, I see that the Finance Committee did not provide an answer for, did not provide why they were not supporting the design and engineering at Flax Pond. Could we get an answer as to why?
Oh, the Finance Committee?
Oh,
All right.
are you-
Do we have a
item-
representative
item
that
B.
wishes to?
Yes, that's me, okay.
All right.
Got the short end this time. I know, I was getting up here one way or another, wasn't I? So what we did was we decided to not approve Part A of that plan. There's been similar studies done on Sandy Pond, and those haven't gone through yet. And so our thought process was, why are we doing all these studies on different things and nothing's coming to fruition? In terms of the pickleball portion, we recommended $70,000 because we were told that the cost, I think, Jeff, was around $68,000. So we didn't see it necessary to give them the full 100, but to give them a little bit of a buffer with the 70. Our other part, I guess, with CPA funding is it's our understanding that those funds can be used to, I think it's repair or replace replace existing structures and things within the town. So we feel that those funds going forward could be used to replace some of the existing courts, tennis courts, basketball courts that we have, rather than going ahead and designing more that are just going to need more upkeep down the road. So we essentially did 0 on the first part.
Okay. All right.
Generally, with CPA, we do it, especially with town projects, we do an up to amount so that we don't end up with the situation with the pickleball courts. And generally, we get money returned because Pat and Jeff usually do a great job. I mean, they don't spend money if we don't have to. We hate to bring it back like 2 and 3 years because we're underfunded by 2,000.
Okay. All right, I'm going to skip over 38. I think we talked about that last year. We'll cover it at town meeting. No need to go into detail at this point with regard to that. And then Article 39 begins a series of articles relative to planning and zoning. You might want to pick a couple highlights. I think there were probably 1 or 2 articles that generated some public interest and commentary during presentations. So
I think the one that had I'm Kathy Williams, town planner. I think the one that had the biggest was the Article 39, which is the accessory dwelling units. That was an initiative that was kind of Cape-wide to take a look at the different accessory dwelling unit bylaws that are available to see if we could create some additional rental units. Planning board spent a lot of time looking at that, trying to be very thoughtful and taking a lot of wide varying opinions into play, but ultimately they decided to generally keep the bylaw that's in place now, but to allow for some elimination of some of the more onerous requirements, mainly regard to the affordable units. Meaning an affordable accessory dwelling unit, you wouldn't need to have that formal deed restriction. You wouldn't have to go through the fair marketing requirements and pay for someone to be able to rent that unit. They also increased the people who would be income eligible from 80% of medium to 100%, so to expand the number of people who would be eligible. And then they also took a look at expanding the definition of family-related. Those are the 2 types of accessory dwelling units that are allowed in town, family-related and affordable accessory apartment. I think the other article that you're talking about that kind of had some discussion was the boat storage article that ended up getting withdrawn. So that's not in the warrant.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes, Chris? Yeah.
I keep looking at some things and asking for some clarity. On page 24, on the section number 9, it says the lot in which the accessory dwelling unit is located must have at least a minimum size lot of 15,000. Does that mean that that's in addition to the existing lot that the main house is on? And the second thing that I'm very, very concerned about that I really don't see a lot of discussion within this is the whole issue of septic, because I am exceedingly troubled that we're a community who's trying to deal with the whole issue of getting past aging septic and cesspools and all the other things while we're looking at trying to get a good sewage system placed in place. And then we're adding the additional people into septic systems. We're looking at additional cars parked in the lot, things like that. Glad to hear the boats are being removed, because I had this vision of several boats on properties with the accessories. But could you answer about what that actually 9 means with that? And then secondly, how are you addressing, and is it addressed within this or whatever, the whole issue of septic, and given the size of a lot that's small? Thank you.
The lot size is the entire lot size that would be a combined for both the accessory dwelling unit and the main dwelling unit. I think with regard to septic, that is one of the things that was a concern for the planning board, and didn't want to make a less restrictive bylaw. There had been a lot of discussions of maybe allowing these units by right. Right now they're allowed by special permit, and they would continue to be allowed by special permit, and also not having any of the family-related or affordable restrictions. But the planning board really felt we don't want to be creating a large number of additional flushes, so to speak, when we don't have the septic system or the municipal sewer system in place at this time. But anybody who's creating an accessory dwelling unit, they have to go through the health department and either make sure that their existing septic system can handle it, or if they're in a zone 2 of one of the wells, they may actually have to eliminate one of the bedrooms within their own home, meaning taking out the window, the doors, and taking out some of the casements and that type of thing in order to put it into an accessory unit. So that's something that would still be monitored through the health department. I think being on septic system is going to be one of the more limiting factors to people creating an accessory dwelling unit, in addition to the overall cost of actually doing it in order to meet building, plumbing, and other codes.
Do you feel like you had adequate time for really studying all of this? Because it looked like you had come across very quickly.
No, we had been discussing this since September, the planning board. And they did look at a large number of different materials. They looked at model bylaws. They looked at other bylaws that were being reviewed in other nearby towns. We also did an analysis looking at the number of small lots that we have in town. We're very, very dense. We're like the second densest residential town on Cape Cod, right behind Dennis. So a lot of these different things were looked at in rather detail for many, many months.
Thank you.
And it was also presented at a housing forum.
Yes, it was discussed a little bit at the listening session for housing, as well as obviously at the planning board public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to fast forward to Article 45, and that's on page 32 of the warrant at the bottom, and that deals with stormwater management. Unless anybody wants to talk about rain and stormwater management, I'll skip over that. I see any hands out there? No, we'll move forward. That is, it's been on the warrant, I think probably for the last 4 or 5 years, Jeff, in one form or another, some funds being allocated for stormwater. Is this planning? I might be misstating the purpose of that.
It's unrelated to funding. This is just amending the existing general bylaw for stormwater that gives the Conservation Commission the rights to create a stormwater management regulation.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then we'll go to Article 46. Mark?
Okay. This is the one you want to land on, huh, Norm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
This article is to establish a beach capital improvement fund. And in order to do that, the town would need to seek approval by the legislature for a program that would authorize the town to set up such a fund to underwrite certain capital improvements or beach improvements. From what I understand, there are a number of other towns that we're familiar with that have actually done similar funds like this, and so I think what we're trying to do is model what other towns have done. So I think that's about it, unless, Dan, you've got something more to add, or?
No, I think your explanation is fair on the reason for doing this. We understand that there's a lot of capital needs, revetment walls, infrastructure, bathroom facilities, concessions. So a portion of fee increases in revenue coming from beach activities will be deposited into that. So at a future date when we need to borrow, you can borrow against the fund. So it's a very preventative measure to help offset the cost that we know is coming down the line.
Well, I think we had some discussion as a board on this issue because we're seeing repetitive requests for funding for beach projects, a variety of things having to do with the beach infrastructure, could be boat landings, could be any number of different things. And I think our board felt that we needed to have a stable fund available, at least to cover part of the expenses of doing some of the capital projects. So this article is arising out of that initiative.
And the fees now go into the general fund, is that
Right,
correct?
that's correct. Yes,
So
that's right.
the specificity for us being able to set fees and use fees for what they're intended to go to is important.
But just recently, we had a section of the boardwalk taken off.
Right.
And we were lucky that the CEDC was able to act quickly to get us some funding to repair that. But this is a scenario where on any given year, you never know what you might lose. So in the future, we'll be able to have more flexibility with that.
We don't have any fees there, but that's a different story.
Okay, the next article,
All right.
one of Mark's favorites, and I'm not calling on you to discuss this, Mark. Actually, Mr. Stone volunteered to go into great depth on the annual fee increases for golf. That's on page 37. Just as a general background, first of all, our golf operations, the 2.5 courses the town operates for many years has been an independent, separately maintained fund, an enterprise fund, if you will. It's the operations of the golf courses have been operated as a business with revenues and expenses at least balancing out. And in recent years, we've had some difficulty with that. And this article is meant to address that. As you may recall from previous discussions over the years, golf fees charged to resident and non-resident taxpayers had been limited in terms of how much they could be increased each year. And the Golf Enterprise Committee has recommended a change to that policy. So Mr. Stone is going to talk about that in just a moment.
Okay, thank you. There was concern over the fact that the Golf Enterprise Fund over the last couple of years has been beneath the break-even point. And so the town, through an article, I believe it was on last year's warrant, has loaned them money to meet their expenses. And there was consideration given in the meantime to whether we were going to privatize it by leasing it out or to a private vendor, or allow the Golf Enterprise Committee an opportunity to right the ship, so to speak. And the proposed fees in here have been vetted by the golf members. There's been a number of meetings, and I've attended those. And I think the residents know that this is even with these fee increases, it's a reasonably good deal for them. And certainly a much better deal than what they would have to pay if the golf courses were privatized. So I believe that the membership is going to be in full support, the golf membership, of these fees. And they're going to, the pre-existing cap on fee increases was 5%. You can see that the raise from $892 to $1,150 is more than that. As I recall, $150 of that was for capital expenses that they were assessing through the golf membership fees. And then the base fee for 2020 for the under 35s and over 80 membership, there was a corresponding increase as well from $535 to $725. There's going to be some other things they're going to have to do that they're looking at. The golf course conditions are excellent, and people are responding to that, not only local residents, but other people who play on the course. There's 2 restaurants, one restaurant and one kind of a snack bar, I guess, and they're going to try to increase the revenues from those operations as well. We'll have to take a look and see attitude about how this plays out in the long run. But again, these fee increases have been vetted among the golf membership and in this forum as well, and there is deep support from the golfers, as far as I can ascertain from the meetings I went to. And hopefully, the public will support that as well. It's not going to affect the tax base at all. It's just going to affect the golf fees. Anybody have any questions?
I think we're wearing people out.
Yeah.
Well, you're getting good answers.
Good. Glad to hear that. All right, so Article 48, which is the next one, it's on page 37, has been withdrawn. And the last article is Article 49, which is a citizen petition with regard to plastic beverage containers, plastic containers generally. Is there someone from the public that wishes? Yes.
Amanda Murphy, West Yarmouth.
Good evening.
Hi. We are proposing a change to the bylaw that we submitted to the board and that we discussed at the last meeting. Which one would you like me to read? Can I read the proposed amendment?
If you're going to make an amendment from the floor, please use the one from the floor that you're going to do. Okay, the revised one. Because that's what's
Okay.
under, that's what we'll consider on May 4th.
Okay.
Thank you.
The article is to see if the town will vote to adopt the following as a general bylaw and to insert it into the code of the town of Yarmouth. Effective September 1st, 2020, the procurement by the town of Yarmouth of either water or any other beverage in single-use plastic containers of any size is prohibited, and the sale of water or any beverage in single-use plastic containers is prohibited on town property.
Could I just cause you pause there for a minute? You said the sale of property. The article actually says dispensing, which is broader than sale.
I'm reading the amended version. The original, we did say dispensing.
Okay, so it's going to say sale?
Yes.
Sorry. All right,
Yep,
go ahead.
we changed, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we added an emergency provision. There were a lot of concerns about that. In the event of a declaration
Okay, I get it.
by emergency manager, director, or other duly authorized town, Commonwealth, or United States official of an emergency affecting the availability and/or quality of drinking water for Yarmouth residents, the town shall be exempt from this bylaw until 7 calendar days after such declaration has ended. The purpose of this bylaw is to help protect environmental, human, animal, and marine health, and to reduce the costs of recycling, litter cleanup, and trash disposal by eliminating the town purchase and sale of packaged water or other beverages in single-use plastic bottles. The town has high-quality tap water and provides regular governmental reports on its quality.
Certainly, yes.
Though I don't know the wording of your amendment as you read it, I believe I heard that you said just the town was not allowed to sell plastic bottles on the town property. So this bylaw will only impact the beach concessions and the golf concessions run by the town of Yarmouth, but all of the smaller stores and people in town will be able to continue to sell plastic bottles. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's what you just want those that are generated through the town businesses. The
Yes,
town.
on town property.
On town property.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Folks are seeking.
I'm sorry, yes.
Let me get it straight. Tonight, I brought in a plastic bottle, and I went over at the end of the hall and filled it with very nice cold water. And if this thing passes, I wouldn't be allowed to do that?
You can bring your own bottle. Yeah, you can bring.
The town wouldn't be able to supply, wouldn't be able to procure it or supply it to you. You'd have to bring your own.
I see this seems to be a pretty well financed thing, because I just got this in the mail today. There was a commercial fisherman who called in with regard to this kind of thing into a radio show last week. He had been doing this for 40 years, and he found over that time that in the water where he fishes around the Cape, commercial fishermen out there, it was just a minuscule amount of debris that he, picked up in all those years. So I think some of the, I don't know where the people get their statistics about, the ocean being inundated with plastic. I would kind of like to hear that.
Okay. We have another.
I don't have any real statistics on how much litter is in the ocean, but it's overwhelming. Microplastics, plastic does not biodegrade, first of all. It's with us forever. It breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, and marine life is now all containing microplastics, as are marine birds. When we eat fish now, we're getting a generous helping of plastic through those microplastics. It's a huge environmental problem.
Bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as far as firefighting goes, we carry cases of bottled water on the fire apparatus for brush fires and structural fires to rehydrate the firefighters. So that would be a little bit of an issue for us. And I know Natural Resources does the same as well as far as that goes. The other thing is when we open the Dennis Yarmouth shelter, if we do have a catastrophic event, and I think your article addresses that, if we are in a sheltering operation or if we do have a contamination of the water service, God forbid, the state's going to bring cases of bottled water for the town, for the shelters as well. I'm not sure how that's going to affect that with this bylaw. Thank you.
Thanks. The other thing is water is available in recyclable cans. It's really, it's a big, plastic is a huge recycling problem as well as it's a health problem, quite frankly.
I guess I'd like to add my observation. I make an observation. I am supportive of a reduction in use of plastics. I think personally, and I thought a lot about this since the initial presentation was made, and thought about it as around our home, where
I was just going to.
here we are,
I knew you were coming.
My partner insists on water, even though I tell her that the Yarmouth water is wonderful, so we've been having some discussion about use of plastics in our home, So within that framework, I'm very supportive of that, and I recognize, as I go out for walks, I see plastics all over the place. I mean, the little nip bottles, to bottles like this, to straws, to any number of things along the roadway, along the pathways. So, very sympathetic to that cause. I have difficulty with a bylaw that focuses on the town of Yarmouth. We're such a small piece in this, and quote unquote making us an example or making us by bylaw require us to do this, just, it strikes me as wrong. And I think that, you know, the people who consume these things have a responsibility, personal responsibility, to dispose of them responsibly or to recycle them. And to say to the town of Yarmouth that we should substitute our judgment for that of the individuals that play on our golf courses, that purchase things here in Town Hall, in vending machines and elsewhere. It just strikes me as something that is very, very bothersome. And, you know, so I'm all for individual responsibility and for people carefully thinking about their impact. I really personally have difficulty with endorsing a bylaw to legislate that the town of Yarmouth should not be dispensing these sorts of things. And you know, I think education is important. And I think an effort, instead of sending postcards out to every member of our community, trying to educate our people with regard to the use of plastics is you know, I think you have a good cause and you have a lot of good information. And I think that the more that you can do that, the more effective it will be in a broader sense, and not just with regard to the town of Yarmouth's very limited distribution.
Okay, I'd like to respond to that. First of all, we're asking our town to take a leadership role in this. This is a Cape-wide initiative. 2 towns have already passed a similar bylaw, P-Town and Wellfleet, and I think there are 6 other towns now considering a similar bylaw. Your next point about education, we'll be doing a presentation at the South Yarmouth Library on May 2nd at 2 p.m. And we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation and have part of a film on Divide and Concord. Concord, Mass. is totally single-use plastic container free. And our initiative is actually, on a long-term basis, we're looking to make this a Cape-wide, not just municipal, but beyond that. We're looking at a much larger picture. We're starting with town government, asking that they take a leadership role. It's a health issue. By the way, I'm an RN.
I think we have another person who has a question as well.
Yes. Yes.
I just have a quick question. If this is going to affect all events that happen on town property, because we have the Seaside Festival, we have the country concerts coming up, we have the St. Patty's Day, and so if you're going to ban plastic, I mean, they have the beer cups, wine cups, you have vendors there that are selling bottled sodas and waters from their trucks. So then are we going to have to tell them that they can't, because nobody's gonna want to come be a sponsor, be a vendor at those events? So I guess, does it affect those because they are on town property?
Yes.
It what?
It would affect vendor contracts.
But don't you think that that would then cause them, I mean, that's all that they sell is bottled sodas, bottled waters, and for people that aren't there to drink, besides the beer trucks, they're going to buy food and a soda. Those vendors aren't going to want to come and do business in Yarmouth, so now you're blocking off a whole other section of commerce and people coming into the town for business, essentially.
Yeah, there are alternatives, as I mentioned. Water is available in cans now, and new products are coming out every day. This isn't something we dreamed up. This is going on in many, many areas, not only of the country, but of the world. The European Union is taking a big look at plastics and doing their share. So this is a global thing that's going on. And I think we all need to get on board. We are inundated with it. We're drinking it and we're eating it.
I just want to ask one question.
I understand the global initiative, and I said I believe that education is very important. I really resent when people come in and say, well, everybody else is doing it, and everybody else is being required to do it, and therefore you should. Then that really is condescending. And pardon me, but I just think individual responsibility goes a long way toward addressing issues of this nature.
I certainly didn't mean any offense to this board or anybody in the audience. That's not our purpose here. So forgive me if I came across that way. That's not what we're about.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, Joe Goldstein. I'm actually going to make a statement that this article doesn't go far enough. What we should be looking in this town, and I did a cleanup, and any of you who may have participated in that cleanup would know that we're becoming the cesspool of the Cape. We had one group who picked up 175 nips in less than a mile.
I think I did that by myself.
I go out every day now to collect garbage in just my small community. I can't tell you how much garbage there is that is plastic. Nips being one of the worst, water bottles being number 2. If I was going to make this article, it would be to prohibit the sale of all plastic bottles under the size of 1 liter. And that's what we should be talking about here, not whether it should be sold on town property. And no offense, Mr. Holcomb, but I believe this town passed an ordinance that prohibited plastic bags from being used in our stores. There is no difference. So talk about condescending, no offense, picking on this poor one article that is really just taking a small look at the problem, when what we should be doing is looking at a much bigger problem, which is the fact that we're creating litter that is making our town look bad. And if we can have a cleaner town, we might just be more inviting to the tourist population that we live off of. Thank you.
Can I make a comment on that? Joe?
Yeah.
Do you think if you, let's take the plastic nips, that's probably one of the worst offending items that there is. They're everywhere.
Absolutely.
Suppose you had a ban on them. Do you think people are not going to buy them in glass and throw the glass all over the place? I remember when nips,
No,
I remember
I would
the
do
days.
plastic and glass.
I remember the days they were glass and you had the glass everywhere too.
No, I'm saying I would restrict the sale of containers smaller than a liter from being sold in our town. Meaning anything that is not for a larger soda or for a larger juice, let's not have them sold in our town. I mean, a 16-ounce bottle of soda being thrown out the windows of cars isn't a healthy thing for us. It makes us look bad. And if we could be one of the few towns that start initiating this movement, I think we'd be much better off. And I don't think liquor stores would care. They'd rather sell pints or quarts. I mean, their dollar that they're making off of those nips, or $1.25. I don't know how much margin there is in that, because the containers alone has got to cost them $0.25. So I'm just bringing up what is a big, major issues. And nips are a huge issue. I don't know if, the chief is here, but for every nip that's thrown out of a window, you potentially have a DUI. And we should do something to take care of our community that's much greater than just on town property.
That's true, and I think that's why you do see so many nips around, but I think you also see beer cans and beer bottles and other pints and half-pint bottles as well.
We know prohibition doesn't work.
Yeah,
Cigarettes, cigarette butts are even worse, but there's certain limitations that we can't really do. We're not going to get rid of cigarettes.
But education had worked very well with cigarettes.
I agree.
All right, are there any other questions on this issue? Yes.
I would like to
Administration.
know what constitutes a single use. What is the definition of single use, and where can I find that?
The single use is partially a weight issue, but those would be bottles that are not sold as reusable. But if you want to use any bottle and fill it with water, you can carry it around. There's nothing in this ban that has anything to do with that. The issue is the town actually procuring, buying single-use bottles.
I don't know what single use is. You're telling me any plastic, any container would be single use? I don't know what single use is.
Right there.
I know, but, okay, so when is
Well, what happens if I go home and fill it with water? Is it still single use?
It's manufactured to be a single-use product.
But you didn't say that.
Well, fine, then you can sell them as reusable bottles, but then...
I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying that when we have bylaws, usually there's definitions that, how is it enforceable when we
It
don't?
does have to do with the weight of the plastic as well, I believe. But I'll be happy, we'll get the definition
Okay.
for you,
All
for
right,
sure.
Well, okay.
I'll do that.
Those are manufactured to be single-use. They do not recommend that people refill them. They're manufactured to be throwaway.
So a 2-liter bottle could be considered single-use. Any plastic container is what you're saying that somebody would purchase and then discard is considered single-use regardless of the size?
No.
Well, I don't know, where's the cutoff? I mean, so if this isn't single-use, they have the bigger Avion or the pure water that's bigger, is that considered single-use? I don't know, I don't know how you enforce something that you don't know what fits into the category.
We've got in the proposed bylaw, any size, single-use, any size. We can certainly find a legal definition of that.
Okay.
But my understanding is any of these bottles, you purchase water, fizzy water, any of those things, soda, any kind of carbonated, those are all single-use plastic bottles.
And so if the town did continue to purchase it, what would the repercussions be?
Because due to this bylaw?
If the members of the people who come to the town meeting approve it, then, and you accept that as a Board of Selectmen in your habits, then it would be the same as with any other rule that has been approved by the town that
Well,
you have not followed.
Okay.
yeah, all right.
Okay. Vita, did you have another question?
No, I don't. Unless somebody else wants to say something. I just wanted to thank you very much, whoever came up with the idea of having this meeting tonight, because I think, honestly, that now we will be flying through on the town meeting day. So thank you very much.
Questions in advance?
Can we have a point of clarification? I agree with that, but can we have a point of clarification just in
Closing. Town meeting will start at 9. Is there an intention for a lunch break or whatever? Will there be a lunch truck there? There have been in years, things like that. What are the intentions in terms of how long the meeting will, when it starts, lunch break, things like that? Could you just clarify the final details on town meeting?
Go ahead, Chris, if you're raising your hand, that's
sure. Yeah, I'll volunteer. Yes, the town moderator is working on getting refreshments for folks. I think the idea this year will be to have something late morning, early afternoon, given the idea or the assumption that most people will come to town meeting already having breakfast. So there'll be some nice food and beverages for folks late morning. As to the length of the meeting, I mean, I can't guess as to how long it will be, but I do know that the moderator, the board, and members of the town meeting committee have been working hard on ways to figure out how to make town meeting the most impactful, accessible, and quick meeting there is.
Thank you.
All right, I'd just like to, if I could just get everybody's attention, I'd just like to take an opportunity to thank the staff for putting this together. I mean, you know, the board's here, but the people that really put the effort into this are all of our staff members, and Dan and Chris in particular, and thank you to the staff that came this evening and participated in the discussion. I think it's been very fruitful and very helpful. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Motion adjourned.
To adjourn. Second.
Yeah, absolutely.